Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan, please. Thank you.
Okay.
Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan. Thank you.
I listened to the speeches from Paris yesterday, and they were passionate and they were inspiring and they were saying all the right things. But saying is one thing and doing is something else. We know that climate change is happening, we know that it is extremely dangerous, and we know that the negotiations have been going on for over 20 years. And because they've been mainly talk, the reality is very grim. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change tell us that if we continue as we are, 50 million more people will be at risk of hunger by 2050, and from the World Bank that in 15 years, 100 million more are going to join those who are already in extreme poverty. Now, when we look at the CO2 emissions per capita, Uganda is 0.1, India is 1.2 and Ireland is 10.5. And we know that those who contribute least to greenhouse gases are those who are most impacted by climate change. And they are the countries that are already suffering conflict, hunger, desperate poverty and in ill health. We also know that it's human activities in the developed world, like burning fossil fuels, like emissions, are the main causes of global warming. And we have so much evidence of the devastating effects. From Ban Ki-moon, I quote yesterday, he said, "Bold climate action is in the national interest of every single country represented. However, the submitted pledges are not enough to keep warming below 2 degrees centigrade, and the EU's pledge of at least 40% reduction is too low. It should be 55%. So my question is relating to finance. The Green Climate Fund. We made no contribution in 2015. We've pledged $2 million in 2016 budget and nothing in subsequent years. Now, the average EU pledge is $12 per capita. Ours translates into 50 cents. And I want to know, was Ireland's contribution to the Green Climate Fund, was this not discussed at Cabinet level before you went to Paris? And will we commit to the fund in line with pledges made by similar developed countries? And also, will we look at the Climate Justice Fund, which was recommended by the Environment Committee here in 2013, especially as you yourself did commit to climate justice?
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. The situation that applied in Paris at the climate change meeting yesterday was, I think, unprecedented in its seriousness. It was very different than what happened in Copenhagen, which hadn't been as well planned or as well thought out in terms of what's to happen. So what was involved yesterday was the setting out of a roadmap for the future, led by the great powers of the world and the leaders of the governments. And that roadmap is now to be filled in over the next 2 weeks by the officials and the diplomats and the ministers from the different governments in respect of the issues that they point out as being of importance. You mentioned a number of countries there, Deputy. I spoke to former Uachtaráin, Mary Robinson, at the meeting. She wasn't directly involved in the negotiations, but as you know, she is an ambassador for climate change, and the former president's real priorities here are climate justice, human rights and gender, and education. And I support that very strongly and refer to that in my own contribution to the meeting. I think it's important to say that Ireland has signed on for, we've given 34 million in respect of public finance for climate change. We have signed on for the Green Fund, and will increase our contributions to that over the coming years, as well as in respect of the developing countries. I might make a point to you that, irrespective of how difficult the situation has been in the last number of years, Ireland and those who work in the different sectors and regions around the world have put together a very high reputation in terms of the work that we actually do and that our people do with peoples in different countries, many of them under exceptionally difficult circumstances. In regard to the point you mentioned about the changes that are coming over the next 50 years, I think it's important also to say that the population of the world is expected to grow to 10 billion. They've got to be fed food security is of critical importance. And I know that there's a balance here between what it is that you can produce and how you can have the transfer of smart technology in the agri-sector in particular, so that other countries can avail of this. But if you look at places like Syria, which has other problems besides, because of the increase in temperature and the drought over the last number of years, without any other conflict or brutal regime, people in their thousands have had to move from what were formerly food-producing areas to cities because of the change in temperature.
Thank you.
And that's not unique to that country. It's applied in so many others as well. So we are committed to contribute to the Green Fund, and we are committed to increase from the initial contribution that we've made over the coming years. And as the economy improves and strengthens, obviously we take those things into account and will.
Thank you. Deputy O'Sullivan.
Taoiseach, I'm not too sure that the NGOs like Trócaire and Oxfam and Friends of the Earth would take much heart from what you just said there. I want to quote, "We, as in Ireland, must challenge ourselves in measuring up and being recognised as a country that really is fulfilling obligations in respect of climate change." And that's what you said to me some months ago at a Leader's question. Now, the one positive thing that came from what you were saying yesterday was about Ireland would be involved in legally binding agreements. But that's not much if those agreements are diluted and watered down. So what's needed in the agreements, and this is I'd like to know where we are, is that human rights has to be integrated in all climate-related actions. We have to commit to food security and not just an increase in industrial food production. There can be no ambiguity around emissions. We need 100% renewable goal and phasing out of fossil fuels, because the biofuel strategy has been a disaster in some countries. We also need independent assessment of the individual country commitments, and the assessment to begin in 2018 with regular reviews. Now, Ireland has got considerable praise for securing international agreement on the Sustainable Development Goals. 10 of the 17 are about climate change. We're acknowledged as a champion in countering hunger, but unless we walk the walk as well on climate change, then we are just guilty of being hypocritical. So it raises the question about policy coherence, that we're going to give development aid on the one hand, which gives us a feel-good factor, and on the other hand, we're taking back. We're not delivering on climate change. So ahead of us, what do? We just keep giving foreign aid, and we pay millions, if not billions, in fines to the EU because we're not meeting targets. So I'm asking that environmental sustainability has to be an indicator of progress, both nationally and globally, and will we commit to that?
Thank you.
And I think that's an important point, and you've made a valid contribution here, Deputy. The situation is that in our case, obviously our profile in terms of what we produce and can produce from the agri-sector is very disproportionate to other countries. No other country, with the exceptions probably of New Zealand and Uruguay, and to an extent Denmark, match Ireland's profile in this regard. So the point is, the targets that were set for Ireland for a 20% reduction by 2020 over 2005 figures are not realisable. And they're not realisable because the European Commission overestimated the extent of what could come from the agriculture sector, and the fact that we had a lost decade of investment in both research and innovation and in changes to deal with this. Now, that doesn't mean that whatever our achievements are by 2020 to be as high as possible. What we need is not a way out, not an escape clause, but what we need is a sense of understanding that we will meet targets that are achievable and fair and sustainable, but we're going to need some time to do that from 2020. Whoever's in government here in those years, if the current situation applies and the 2020 targets are imposed on Ireland, which we will not be able to meet, then between 2020 and 2030, whatever administration is in here, our administrations, we could suffer the question of very serious fines. My point is that as our economy improves, while we won't be able to meet all of the targets set for 2020, we will be able to catch up much more rapidly than others, because we're doing the research and the innovative smart technology in the agri-sector, and the fact of the matter remains that we can produce so much more high-quality food to feed people in other places, and the research and the technology that we use can be transferred to others. I listened to a view this morning saying that 45,000 beef farms that we have in the country, which are now all carbon footprinted or being carbon footprinted, should instead be planted with forestry. If you follow that line of logic, well then you decrease the capacity to produce food by the 1,000 tonnes, and you transfer the opportunity for more rainforests to be demolished and levelled, and possibly food produced to inferior standards with much higher emissions. So there's a balance and common sense required here. I'm all for ambitious targets, but I want targets that we can achieve, and in that sense there's some hard bargaining and understanding to be had with the European Commission in the next fortnight. These targets will be set down, Deputy, by mid-February, and when they are set down, they're going to be exceptionally difficult to change. For the reasons I've given you, what was put in Ireland's plate when these targets were set originally is not acceptable to me, and it's not acceptable to the government, because it's unachievable. We want to achieve targets that are fair and that are sustainable. They will also take into account what it is that we can supply to other countries, both in terms of education, research, innovation, knowledge and food.
Thank you. That completes Leaders' questions for today.